Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the harrowing, yet deeply profound experiences of psychiatrist Viktor Frankl. We're going to explore how he managed to discover the ultimate human freedom while locked inside the brutal confines of Nazi concentration camps. Frankl's story, well, it isn't just a survival tale. It's this incredibly raw psychological observation of what actually happens to the human mind when absolutely every comfort, right, and certainty is just violently stripped away. It forces us to ask a terrifying but totally necessary question. Who are we, truly, when everything we know is gone?
So just imagine it for a second. You're stripped of your home, your family, your life's work, your very identity. You're reduced to nothing but a number tattooed on your arm. What is actually left of you? To understand Frankl's brilliant answer to this, we need to rewind just a bit and look at a pivotal moment right before he lost it all.
Get this, shortly before the U.S. entered World War II, Frankl actually held a highly coveted American immigration visa. He could have escaped. Done. But he hesitated. He agonized over whether to leave his aging parents behind to face the camps all alone. Then, he spots this piece of ruined marble on a table at home. His dad had rescued it from the largest Viennese synagogue after it was burned down. It had just one engraved Hebrew letter on it, representing a powerful commandment: honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land. Seeing that, it was a sign. Frankl made the life-altering choice to let his visa lapse and stay right there in Vienna with his parents.
Section 1. The Dilemma of Departure. A choice before the camps.
It's really wild to think about, but Frankl's psychological journey didn't start behind barbed wire. It started right there in his living room, in those quiet, agonizing moments of choosing duty and love over his own personal survival. This heartbreaking dilemma sets up the entire foundation of our explainer today, the inescapable reality of human choice. Even before the physical horrors began, Frankl proved that our decisions define our path. And the weight of that one choice? It would carry him through the unimaginable darkness that was coming.
Section 2. The Psychology of the Camp, Stripped to Naked Existence.
To truly grasp the magnitude of the choices Frankl made later, we have to understand the absolutely devastating psychological environment he was thrust into. Watching everything through the sharp lens of a psychiatrist, Frankl noticed prisoners generally went through three distinct phases. First, sheer shock upon admission, desperately clinging to the irrational hope they might get saved at the last second. The third phase was the incredibly complex psychology following liberation. But today, we're focusing heavily on phase 2, the grueling camp routine, where survival literally meant emotional death.
And that brings us to apathy. But actually, scratch that. It wasn't just apathy like we think of it today, like a bad mood or depression. It was a strict biological and psychological necessity. In a place of constant, overwhelming trauma, emotional death was required just to stop the human brain from completely short-circuiting. Frankl talked about watching a 12-year-old boy's frostbitten toes being picked off with tweezers and feeling absolutely nothing. This protective shell forced a prisoner's inner life down to a purely primitive level, 100% focused on just staying alive. But even in this primitive state, you still had to make choices. And the intense mental battles over the tiniest things reveal so much about the human spirit. Take the daily ration, usually just a tiny, rock-hard piece of stale bread. Inmates constantly argued over the best strategy. Do you wolf it down immediately, kill the worst of the hunger, and guarantee no one steals it? Or do you carefully divide it up, hiding a crumb in your pocket for tiny hits of willpower to get through a brutal day of manual labor? Frankl went with the second option. Choosing how and when to eat that bread wasn't just about food. It was a desperate grab for agency, a tiny, defiant flex of free will in a system engineered to crush it.
Complicating all of these daily struggles was a state Frankl called a provisional existence. Think about how tough it is in normal life when you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, like a long period of unemployment. Now multiply that dread by 1,000,000. Because the prisoners had zero clue if or when they'd be released, they couldn't plan for the future. It completely warped their sense of time. One single day of freezing torture felt like it lasted a year, while weeks just blurred into nothing. Without a future to look forward to, many just lost their spiritual grip on life and gave up entirely.
Section 3. The Ultimate Human Freedom, the Choice of Attitude.
This leads us to a really fascinating duality, and it's the absolute core of Frankl's psychological revelation. Yes, the external reality of the camp stripped prisoners of literally everything. They were just numbers, herded like sheep, totally at the mercy of brutal guards. But, as Frankl realized, their internal reality, that remained a sanctuary. Inside the fortress of their own minds, they still held immense power. They could keep their spiritual freedom, their independence, and their own personal value, no matter what was being done to their bodies. And this was a massive breakthrough. He realized, and I quote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." Frankl figured out that the kind of person a prisoner became, whether they acted like an animal or kept their dignity, was the direct result of an inner decision. It wasn't just the unavoidable result of the camp environment. Frankl anchored his entire psychological survival on this concept, and he loved to quote the philosopher Nietzsche, "He who has a why to live can bear with almost any how." For Frankl, his why was love and purpose. During these freezing, exhausting marches in the snow, he kept himself going by having vivid conversations with his wife in his mind. He also found profound purpose by scribbling shorthand notes on tiny, scavenged scraps of paper, basically reconstructing his lost scientific manuscript from memory. He purposefully gave himself a reason to look at the future.
Section 4. The choice to stay. The crucible in the typhus ward.
We're going to see this philosophy play out in real time during one of the most dramatic moments of Frankl's entire ordeal. Near the end of his imprisonment, he was working as a doctor in a totally undersupplied typhus ward. It was horrific. The smell of death, constant groaning, zero medicine. But as the battlefront drew near, he and a buddy got a fleeting, super rare chance to escape into the woods. A resistance member was bringing uniforms. Frankl had a rucksack hidden and packed with his food ball, torn mittens, and his precious manuscript notes. Freedom was quite literally steps away. Imagine the adrenaline rush. The gate is right there, the plan is locked in, his heart is pounding. With his rucksack ready, Frankl decides to make one last round to check on his patients. He walks up to his only countryman, a guy who is actively dying. The man looks up at him with this sad, accusatory gaze and asks this incredibly piercing question, "You too are getting out?" Guilt just hit him like a ton of bricks. In a lightning-fast moment of decision, Frankl completely scrapped the escape plan. He ran outside, told his friend he couldn't do it, and walked right back into that miserable infectious hut. He sat down on the wooden boards at his dying patient's feet just to comfort him. And this is so crucial. No guard forced him to do this. He chose to face an uncertain fate and highly probable death alongside the sick men who needed him. It was the ultimate, defiant expression of his internal freedom. It's honestly mind-blowing to hear his reflection on this moment. By actively choosing responsibility and meaning over saving his own skin, he achieved a state of total inner freedom. Right in the middle of a literal hell on earth, surrounded by disease and impending doom, he felt an inward peace he had never experienced before. Why? Because he took total control of his own attitude and his own actions.
Section 5. Meaning in extreme suffering. The core of logotherapy.
Frankl's survival and his realization that meaning dictates how much we can endure formed the bedrock of his whole psychological framework. He developed something called logotherapy. Now, unlike therapies that dig around in a repressed past, logotherapy is completely forward-looking. It aims to cure what Frankl calls the existential vacuum. You know, that feeling of emptiness and lack of purpose so many of us struggle with today, even when our basic needs are met. Logotherapy tackles this by challenging you to find your unique meaning and take absolute responsibility for your life.
So, Frankl teaches us that meaning is found in three main ways. First, through an active life, doing creative work or meaningful deeds. Second, a passive life, experiencing beauty, nature, or deeply loving someone else. But crucially, the third way kicks in when creativity and enjoyment are completely taken off the table. When faced with unavoidable suffering, maybe it's a terminal illness, a tragic loss, or a camp, the suffering itself offers a profound chance for moral greatness. It all comes down to the attitude we choose to take toward that inescapable pain.
Frankl brought up this heavy quote by Dostoevsky all the time. "There is only one thing that I dread, not to be worthy of my sufferings." He pointed out that the way a person bears their cross gives them a massive opportunity to add a much deeper meaning to their life. Those few prisoners who walked through the huts comforting people, literally giving away their very last crumbs of bread, they proved they were absolutely worthy of their sufferings. They kept their inner liberty completely intact right up to the end.
So this completely flips how we look at our own goals, right? Frankl warned his students not to aim directly at success or happiness, because if you make them a target, you're gonna miss. Instead, he argued that if you just surrender to a meaning or a cause greater than yourself, success and happiness will naturally ensue as a side effect. You just have to let it happen by throwing yourself fully into the responsibilities standing right in front of you.
And that leaves us with one massive, ultimate question. When faced with your own unavoidable suffering, how will you choose to respond? Because, as Viktor Frankl proved in the darkest, most agonizing abyss of human history, you can't always control what happens to you, for sure. But that final choice of how to react, that ultimate freedom of attitude, that always belongs entirely to you.